Yeah, hey guys, thanks for being here. And I know also that we have a big competition right now in terms of speakers. So there's another talk where most of you would want to be, but I think we could change that through actually explaining you a little bit about what we are working on and what is our background. So our talk is called From Coded Cultures to Future Cryptoeconomics, and these are two topics and two terms that we are basically working with in our institute. So that's me, Matthias Tarasiewicz. Here are my colleagues Daniel Pichler and Jürgen Hoebarth. And I want to actually briefly introduce what we are doing with the Institute for Future Cryptoeconomics. We exist since 2012. And we also do an academy, which is largely based currently on Ethereum and blockchain development. So there's upcoming also dates for this. So please check out the Riot Academy website. There's one, will be one Ethereum academy happening in Vienna soon. And this talk will basically, and I give an overview so you know what you bought into, basically. So we will have first and foremost coded cultures as project cultures. I will explain how we work, how we see projects, how we think that developers are project-centered, and developers basically exist since a very long time. So if we go back in history, we can see parallels with different other cultures. Then we will briefly talk about cryptocurrency as distributed community experiments, which is actually also coming from a developer-based culture, from an experimentation culture. And then we will have a history of crypto sentiment changes in tokenization, a small different approach also. So we are taking here also the term and the turn to go from alternative histories from different parts of crypto to understand where we are located today. What is the history today, what is the future history? And we will have Jürgen tell a little bit about the story of crowd sales and where we are right now with crowd sales. And then we will give a conclusion, more developing or more framing it into the WeAreDevelopers conference. So we are basically with Riot working on these three formats right now. So it's the Laboratory for Future Cryptoeconomics is a space and is a research unit looking into cryptoeconomics and how cryptoeconomics intersect in the future. So I don't know if every one of you knows what cryptoeconomics is, but Bitcoin was the first cryptoeconomic system, and we are facing now large tokenization models and large incentivization, but also penalization or penalizing models that can intersect in the future. So the society will change. If everything is tokenized, everything will change for the better, for the worse, we don't know, but we are trying to tackle this with different interdisciplinary questions. And for that, we also have the Residency for Future Cryptoeconomics, which is bringing 12 researchers, international researchers, to Vienna. So we're working with them. We have a large space in Vienna, and we are co-working with these people. And we are developing the Journal for Cryptoeconomics currently, which is an academic journal that is trying to bring together different fringe research perspectives, international research perspectives. And I'm a researcher, and my background is I'm a technology theorist. I'm developing since I'm approximately 9 or 10. I'm working mostly and full-time with cryptoeconomics, with blockchain development. Also, we are working with specific companies, with specific projects, but also we're working largely in the open source sector. So I'm also the director of Riot, but also I'm a board member of the OSHWA, which is the Open Source Hardware Association, an US-based NGO that is facilitating open hardware development and trying to make and apply the same principles as we have with open source software onto open source hardware. And I'm running a lot of research projects since quite some years. Also, we have another journal which is called the Journal for Research Cultures, which is looking into this kind of fringe research that I will explain you a little bit more in detail. And yeah, we are, maybe some of you know the Axiom Open Hardware Cinema Camera, which is a fully open hardware camera. This was also co-developed with us. But also we're doing a lot of advocacy and trying to explain to different audiences what technology is, what is the magic of technology. So we have a book, for example, which is called Making Artistic Technology that we have been working on, which is a book for kids to learn hacking and tweaking. So I want to go back and tell a very different story about Riot, because usually we start with the cryptoeconomics and with the technology, but actually our background is in arts and in design. So this was a book we have been writing and we have been editing, which was coming out in 2014, which is called Coded Cultures, New Creative Practices Out of Diversity, which is interesting to my perspective because a lot of the crypto developments, a lot of the early altcoin developments are rooted in experimental cultures that are not so much only developer-based, but are based around specific modes of production. I would call them production cultures, and are also wrote an article in the Coded Cultures book pointing to these fringe methods of working, which is like you don't follow one specific goal. You don't know what basically where you might end up with, but you know that you have a specific method, you have a specific skill, and you want to foster this skill, and you know that this can lead you somewhere. So very interesting text by Christian Rader, one of the co-editors of the book also, was looking into projects. So his text was about projects, project world, project cultures, and he's pointing to the fact that with a project, and also with information, with knowledge, people can, with this is actually possible to create one's own individual chains of value creation. So value was a very important aspect, and though we don't look at specific value in a kind of, I would say, a fiat value of knowledge, we're looking into value of knowledge. And to artists, to makers, to people who are producing something, to coders, there is a specific knowledge embedded in the way they work, and embedded in believing in the project, for example. So this is very crucial also to understand how these early crypto cultures and how these early cryptocurrency experiments started by believing in a project. And there's also a very interesting fact and parallel. If you go back into the history of project, there's another book by Christian Rader, who was basically translating a book from Daniel Defoe. You know him from Robinson Crusoe. But actually, this is a very old book pointing to the fact that what is the power of the project. So you have a lot of interesting projects in history where it's needed. You need always somebody who starts the project, who is like ambitious and who is like working hard and trying to convince another person to follow this idea. So you have to in the early days, you would have to convince a specific funder, a king maybe or something, to give you money, that you have your ship, and then you can undertake your project, that you can create a new economic or find a new economic route, find a new specific market. This is interesting that we can draw a lot of parallels, actually dating back to 1697, in how projects are undertaken. And this is interesting because production cultures realize projects, obviously. So these production cultures are also developers. So developers realize projects. They don't sell necessarily the project before they have it, but they realize projects. So my attempt on tackling this was back in the days, 2014, with coded cultures, and the term was also specifically chosen in order to make sure that we are not excluding, but also we are excluding different people and different cultures, but also to point to the fact that the knowledge and the specific inherent knowledge that you have in these groups is somehow obfuscated, hidden, it's coded. So cultures have their specific codices, they have the specific rules, they have a specific way of working together that is not necessarily obvious to everyone. And if you're not inside the group, you might actually miss a point, which is actually interesting, pointing to the fact that in cryptocurrencies, it's often called an inside job, an insider trading situation, which is obvious if we look at that they are coded cultures and they have an embedded knowledge and they have maybe an advantage by knowing something earlier than someone else, so that have a specific codex or have a specific understanding of a term that it might be different than the outside. So actually drawing to another history of right, and this is usually the history we present, we see the interesting development of cryptocurrency in Austria. So we made this kind of a map where we tried to look at where is actual research and where is this culture coming from? Where's the cryptocurrency, the blockchain culture coming from in Austria? Then if you look at all these kind of different milestones of Austria, you see Bitcoin Austria was founded in 2011. We had a very amazing meeting in Vienna with Bitcoin Austria, Charlie Schramm, Gavin Anderson, Amir Taki, and so on in 2012. So Austria is actually a crypto hub without us knowing it, without us maybe being part of this or now being part, but there's kind of an old coin and new coin culture. There's all these things happened, but they happened not in institutions. They happened outside of institutions. They happened in small groups of people that were meeting each other. They were discussing something, coding groups. So it's like not the institutions that brought us all these kind of innovations. And this is interesting because also like we as a research institute, although we take the position of an institution, we are actually makers, we are doers, we are developers. So there's another text, and this is the text that brought me actually deeper into the crypto sphere. This was actually written in 2014 together with my colleague Andrew Newman. You can find this text also online. It's called Cryptocurrencies as Distributed Community Experiments. And it's so important to me to point out that this all comes together in this one text. So for us, at this moment, in 2014, we were looking at all these different altcoins that you had back then. It's a very different story that we see today because the game changed a lot. But we actually, back then, how it was actually happening, we had specific coins and specific forks of Bitcoin that would create a new value proposition. So in the end, there was the Bitcoin, or let's say in 2010, 2011, there was the Bitcoin code out there. Yeah? So people would actually have to fork the code base, change some attributes, make it an inflationary currency, change the amounts of tokens, have to name the tokens, create a complete culture, create a design, and actually make people believe so much about the project that they would actually buy into this coin or like trade something for this coin. So the interesting thing is there is an actual market before markets, which is actually a market of projects. And this is what we want to present you today in a very different aspect. And especially since then, with the altcoins and with the different value propositions that we had through altcoins, through forks, through code forks, we had Ethereum then suddenly popping up, which changed the game by far. And my colleague Daniel Pichler was writing an excellent piece about this, which is called Tokenization, the Shifting Future of Digital Assets, a recent text by him, which is explaining this a little bit from the perspective of Ethereum, from the perspective of the tokenizations. And these specific tokens changed the game insofar that you wouldn't have to run your specific nodes. So you would actually have an infrastructure, an existing system where you can actually create your own tokens, but as long as the Ethereum chain itself exists, as long as the Ethereum network exists, you would, as a creator of these tokens, not have to check and make sure that there are specific amounts of nodes happening. So this changed a lot, and this actually effectively destroyed the altcoin structure as it was actually existing back then. And it's interesting, and we want to actually now hopefully hear from Daniel how this affected the cultures. So thank you very much, and here's my colleague, Daniel Pichler.
Thanks. So that's me in very short. I'm a researcher also at the Riot Institute for Future Cryptoeconomics. I've been in the scene for some time. So I'm also board member of Bitcoin Austria, involved with a blockchain research accelerator, and like my background is half technical, half business. I want to tell you something about like the story of the history and the sentiment of cryptocurrencies shortly. So a lot of things that happen in the crypto world are linked to it being a time frame of things that repeated itself over and over. And I think it's kind of nice to see if you want to predict the future in anything, you need to know like how the history played out so far. And that's what I want to dive a bit into, because it all kind of boils down to like something that's very time related. In history, we kind of had like very few changes for ourselves. You have the prehistoric times, so basically didn't have any like written down notes. We had like a time when people actually started writing down like what happened in history, but it could be a lie, it could be truth, it couldn't be verified. And now we kind of like enter a new form of history. We enter like a history that's actually like verifiable, that it happened in the past. At least with the blockchain, we can verify what happened at like a specific point in time. And that's actually a kind of like interesting development in itself. So I want to shortly go through this very short part of our new like crypto history and what has happened so far. The years 2009 until 2011, I don't think we can read it here very well, was kind of the stone age of the cryptocurrency movement. Like the first platforms pumped up, you had like Bitcoin Talk as the first forum where a few people organized around the topic after the white paper came out, and pretty much like people around the world were scattered like this guy. So you had a few people that read the white paper all around the globe, and like they had no friends, like there were no other people that in the vicinity that cared about what they cared about. The only people that they usually found were like online on forums like on Bitcoin Talk. And that was kind of important for them, and it was important for me because it kind of like validated at one point, like, okay, you're not crazy, you're not alone. It feels very lonely in like those very early days, but it's really nice to find some validation. And you can also see this as like just the members of Bitcoin Talk. Like back in 2010, I just looked it up today, there were like 3,500 members on Bitcoin Talk. So like all those talks you hear right now, oh, if I would have just bought Bitcoin in 2009, you were probably one of the 3,000 people that would have even heard about it. So that would already have been amazing. This all changed with like the Bitcoin bubble. Actually, like who has heard that Bitcoin is in a bubble this year? Like, you know, I always love this because like I'm sure like we couldn't have done like this in a few years, like in 2011. But like I'm sure there were some people that said like, oh, Bitcoin is in a bubble, and then like we had this bubble happening where you had like the price of $1 finally reached, and everybody got excited, and then it traded up to $20. And it crashed. It crashed to back to $2, and everybody was less excited about that. This was also like in the early times when you had like very high Bitcoin inflation, so like a lot of new Bitcoins were created, and the kind of whole sentiment was like that's a game. Like, does it even have value? Like, it's a fun thing, but like, what's the point? So the tenet that was questioned was, does cryptocurrency have value at all? Like nobody really could answer that question. You also had like those beautiful articles back then, which I just crawled out of archive.org, which kind of helped you to like save your crypto inheritance for the future with 14 easy steps. Step 1 was downloading TrueCrypt. Then there were a lot of steps with WinRAR and like in the console. So it was a horrible user experience back then. And also they deleted this like tutorial because it's just the most unsafe thing ever. But that's how people kind of interacted with the blockchain back then and tried to keep their money safe. Oh yeah, that's the beautiful bubble. The horrors of 2011. So, but like things changed, things got easier. Also, like back then, you can imagine like the trades when people say, "Oh yeah, you should have just bought like $1,000 in Bitcoin in 2009." Great, you would have literally like seen a forum post and sent somebody $1,000 that you've never seen for like some play money that nobody has ever heard about. So you would have been pretty insane to do that. This changed a bit once we had like real exchanges, so people could trade like some volume of Bitcoin with fiat money. That was like the whole age of 2012 and 13, where you had MTGOX, this Magic the Gathering online exchange, becoming a real Bitcoin exchange. And this also like spurred like a lot of growth in the area because people like stopped questioning does it have value? But it went more towards like, okay, it has value, but like what kind of value does it have? And as soon as somebody establishes there is value, there's money to be made, the first thing what happens is competition. So we got altcoins. We got like Litecoin basically on this inception point where people understood like this is a system that kind of has value. Some people make and lose money with it. Let's make an alternative right now. What was also interesting back then was the halving event. So like if you're not too deep into Bitcoin, Bitcoin has an event where all 4 years the inflation rate halves. And that could be like have some effects on the price, also on the scarcity of Bitcoin in itself. And this was the first kind of big scarcity creating event in Bitcoin back in 2012. If you've been around back then, the thing that you might have seen was MTGOX, like the biggest exchange I told you about, taking away all the market with 70% market share and then epically fail and lose all your money. So in 2013, 14, like MTGOX actually got a lot of Bitcoin stolen or lost it, and we don't know really. And they went bankrupt. And with that, like also a lot of people lost their money. Because if you remember from the slide before, you had 14 easy steps to keep your money secure. Nobody followed them, so like a lot of people left it with MTGOX and just lost it all. With like this rise of alternatives, you also had like a movement that kind of went into the politics side. It was called like Bitcoin maximalism. You probably can still hear that. So this is the idea that like there's one coin to rule them all. Like Bitcoin is kind of the value chain of all cryptocurrencies. And then there are other coins like Litecoin that are basically testing beds that are totally worthless, but they exist. You could also see that in the price, because the price of Bitcoin was basically 90% plus of the market, so there wasn't really any competition that was like taken seriously. And what happened with the halving and with like this price increase? The last bubble, like we don't even see it here anymore because it would have been like up here, and we got like another bubble like after the halving, like half a year after, bringing us to the magical stop of $1,000, and then all the way back down with the implosion of empty gogs. So what did we learn? Like people learned some things. Like they learned that like holding your own cryptocurrency is really important. It's kind of like also this irony that you heard a lot of cyberpunks that were against banks. They wanted to hold their own money and be secure, and then most of them left the money with like some dude in Japan and lost it there. So people got smarter, and what they did was they invested and bought hardware wallets. So the first hardware wallet actually came out in, like you could pre-order in 2013, but you would get it in 2014, which was the Trezor back there on the left. I think the first one were in black. And people like paid way more like attention to security because they now have established it's worth something, it's easy to lose. I don't want to lose it, I want to keep it. Then there was also, as we have established, okay, there are like alternatives to Bitcoin, and one of them was Ethereum. So Ethereum ICO'd in 2014, pretty early, but also still the community wasn't sure if there would be anything else valuable in the world besides Bitcoin. So Ethereum didn't have much value back then. To their detriment, to their bonus and to the detriment, two things happened. Like Ethereum went along with the EIP20 standard, which gave them the ability to form tokens easily on Ethereum. It was already possible on Bitcoin, but it was a hassle, so nobody used it. And they like gave Ethereum that option in 2015. And to their worst, like the community, so as young as it was, directly split in half because they made the decision that some of the money that somebody stole should be bailed out, basically. And that was very controversial. So the community split in two and went the route of Ethereum Classic, which was kind of this immutable, like Bitcoin-like ledger, and the more kind of, it's hard to say progressive, but the one less immutable, like Ethereum chain, that was like, okay, we can change, we can still adapt, we can introduce more immutability later in the process. And that also didn't really help the Ethereum price at all, at least at first. And like the question back then again changed. So what happened in Bitcoin land was basically, so Bitcoin is cool, but this Ethereum thing, like it does a lot of things. And like back then we were promised that Bitcoin could do all the things. Like everything else was a testing bed. We just accept the best ideas. And this notion kind of like got away from a few people. So they were kind of disenfranchised when other people told them, this is not how Bitcoin works. Like in my view, Bitcoin is this super stable, super secure ledger. Ethereum is like already split its community. We don't want to be that. We want to be something stable, secure. We want to be gold for the long run. So politics got introduced. The beautiful game of politics where you got Bitcoin Cash versus this gold idea that Bitcoin is like a gold standard. And because of this kind of, like in real life politics, nothing really gets done for some time. There was also the question if those ICOs that Ethereum just invented, basically with the EIP20 standard, were worth something, similar to what we had in cryptocurrency in the early phases, like, okay, it's a nice game, but like, can it do anything and is it worth something? So somebody had to establish value in this game. And this actually also happened. So if we look a bit further into the history, what happened in 2017, after 3 years of Bitcoin infighting, where the idea was never established to find consensus between, okay, we can be fast, we can do a lot of transactions, we can do smart contracts like Ethereum, or we can't, but we are stable, we are secure. like some people in the community got disenfranchised. They felt like their dream of what Bitcoin can all be, like the rose-colored glasses came off, and like Bitcoin took another turn for them. And you saw that in the valuation. So people searched for alternatives, and they were like, okay, Bitcoin doesn't follow my standards, so what else did? So maybe Ethereum does. So a lot of people like moved into Ethereum at that time, and like gave pressure onto like the Bitcoin community. Also other things like Ripple and Dash, kind of like they introduced different visions of this whole concept. And as kind of the main strong arm of the crypto community was bleeding, everybody tried to grab a piece of that cake. And this kind of leads us also to today and like to the last explosion, of the price, which happened now in 2017-18. It also came, I think I forgot to mention that, with the halving in 2016. So there was another halving after some time of stagnation. And it led us also, likely, that might be controversial, but partly to like another explosion in the Bitcoin price. There was also this fact that people wanted to get into Ethereum, but all the exchanges offered basically just Bitcoin. So you kind of had to buy Bitcoin to buy Ethereum to buy into ICOs. So everything kind of went over Bitcoin. Bitcoin got a lot of like buying pressure again, and like rose up over the last months and years. And Ethereum kind of established something new. It established that even like ICOs can have some value, because now you had this thinking of, okay, Bitcoin funded the Ethereum ICO, and because Bitcoin is bleeding now, Ethereum gets value. So like those ICO investors in Ethereum are all geniuses, and they made a lot of money with that. So everybody was like, okay, ICOs work. It's the most amazing thing. I invested into an ICO and I'm rich now. It's called Ethereum. Great. So the market kind of established that like all ICOs can be worth something, and that's also like something that we will have the questions over the next years. But some ICOs were worth a lot after you invested in them, and Ethereum was definitely the most valuable from that. And with this, also on Ethereum, a lot of ICOs happened. So basically, they opened up this market. While they had to still prove that this is even a valuable market in the first place, and now you could basically launch an ICO, and just the fact that you did that, people kind of assumed this would be a valuable thing for the future, would be a sustainable thing. And to also mention that, like what happened in the Bitcoin community on the other side, this was they felt the pressure. So in the Bitcoin community, you had this 3-year struggle of like, no, we do SegWit, we do like 2 megabyte block size increase, we do 8 megabyte, okay, let's do 8 megabyte, oh no, we don't. It was a big back and forth, and it got us that kind of people agreed, probably also like a bit controversial to say it like that, but some people thought we agreed on like doing a 2 megabyte increase and like SegWit at the same time. And those are two kind of different scaling solutions, so that the community would stay as kind of a one-piece thing. But then, when it got closer to this like deadline of implementing SegWit, part of the community said like, we will do the one thing and we will not do the other. So people like felt really pressurized to like do something against their idea getting taken away. And at that point, like this part of the community built Bitcoin Cash with the SegWit fork. So now you had like 2 Bitcoins, Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, kind of the old currency, and they both just follow different like visions of this this kind of chain. What it also showed us, again, hard forks like Bitcoin Cash can have value. So a lot of hard forks have been happening now, because always as soon as somebody established that something can have value, everybody else tries it as well. Yeah, and that gave us kind of this bubble where we are in right now. We will see how this pans out, also like in the ICO and tokenization market. Especially here, there's a lot of like things that happen, that will happen. Like tokens are kind of, they have kind of the base layer of things figured out. So you have this idea that you don't have to keep your token secure because it's already secured by Ethereum. But on the other hand, like this idea of like it having value is still like has to be determined by something else. So by you binding it to a company, you're binding it to a utility, you're binding it to something that you agree upon with like the people who buy it. And this is like a complex discussion, and this is also where like this whole cryptoeconomics idea kind of comes more and more into play, because we now can like create systems that like use a token, but what does this token actually do and how does it actually keep and increase in value is something that should be debated more, and that's why we are like researching actively. And this is like one a way of like classifying tokens by the Untitled guys from Germany. So if you just want to classify tokens into areas, there are a lot of like those kind of taxonomies. So it's also a very like open field still, because a lot of things haven't been clarified. We don't know if tokens work on the long run. Like people assume it, but we haven't verified it at all. And this is going to be the question for the next years. But I'm not here to speculate. I was here to tell you a bit about the history. And now I'm giving you Jürgen, telling you something about like how the tokens look like at the moment.
Okay. Okay, let's start. And I don't see anything. Okay, good. I tell a little bit of story from a different kind of angle, and technically from the angle of how like crowd sales were happening and like how token issuing was happening in the early days. So if you think about it, I want to start by giving a little bit that we know each other. So I'm into startups since a very long time. I like to travel a lot, and I'm into crypto. I'm not the altcoiner as those two gentlemen. I'm a defined midcoiner, means I got attracted to Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrency when Mt. Gox happened. So I had a lot of time to learn a lot of things the last 4 years. So there's a little bit of something, because no one did it so far, a question time. So how many of you know crypto assets actually? Or how many of you own crypto assets? Okay, that's that's very surprising, because I went like a few days to the conference here and I was thinking, okay, a lot of developers, so everyone should be in cryptocurrencies, but I realized it's still a small market. So how many of you have heard of ICOs technically? Okay, most likely in the media, that's good. And any blockchain developers are here? Okay, that's good, so they're growing. That's very nice. And before I really start, I give you an idea. So the ICOs in the beginning, or token sales, some people had an idea or a product, and then what they were asking for, okay, we have something, let's say a ship, very abstract, and we need some funds to sail and to get the message out about the product. When we talk nowadays about token sales and everything, most likely what they really have is an idea, and a very big one. So we want to build a ship, we want to sail around the world, no specifically know where they're going, and we also will bring you a lot of gold and goods back, and you need a ton of funds. Because if you're talking now about ICOs, they're going in the billions, which is a little bit crazy, but that's a different story. Okay, I call it 10,000 BE before Ethereum, which is actually like early 2014. When you were doing a kind of an ICO back then, or it was even not called ICO, it was called Initial Public Coin Offering, a little bit different. You just had an Ethereum address where you were sending your Ethereum, and then there was a nice list that you were seeing how much was sent. You didn't get back any tokens, nothing happened basically. Randomly, you had to wait that once they were starting to mine, that you would get some contributions back. Then we're talking about like 5,000 before Ethereum, which I call like mid-2014. It was still simple, and all the things where you were getting was something like, it was the time of Neo ICO, it was the time of Ethereum ICO. Yes, you had the Bitcoin address, you were sending something. Most likely you didn't get anything back for months. The only thing you got back was a nice JSON file, which most likely you stored somewhere, which you forgot. And I can tell you a story about that. There were no terms of services to what you're agreeing on. There was basically no legal framework even. And this time was like how an Ethereum ICO looked back then. You basically said how much amount of Bitcoin you want to throw in. Then they were saying, okay, how much you would get in Ether. You put in your email address and you got a nice JSON file, and then nothing happened literally for 1 year. So the 1 year was from mid-2014 to mid-2015, which I call a little bit sort of dark ages. It was where all these things were happening about Bitcoin crash, like Bitcoin crash 1.0 or 2.0, whatever that was. And in that time, it was where I had a lot of time to learn things, like say it this way. I forgot even about that I bought into Ethereum. And then something very magically happened. 2015, Ethereum launched. So you can imagine, now if you do an ICO, people ask you immediately to get the tokens. There we nearly wait like for months to get even something going. And that's basically kind of where the whole craziness started. And I call it like 1 year after Ethereum launched, which is mid-2014. And ICO still worked like very easily. Instead of a Bitcoin address, then it was an Ethereum address, which was like, a little bit advanced. Most of the people, if you were early in, you know, like my Ether wallet and all these very funny ways to send Ether in, and then there's gas war started and stuff like this. I think you missed one slide. Anyway, if you talk 100 after Ethereum, which is technically considered, it's 24 months ago. Just keep this in your mind. There was happening something which we'll call this one, the DAO, where a lot of Ethereum people lost a lot of money, kind of, which then had as a result a fork. And back then it was actually like this, from a usability perspective, a whole, like a very long number, which you can get very easily confused about, where you had to send your Ethereums. But what happened, they kind of had already terms of service, but I mean, it was even useless because the DAO crashed. So 500 after Ethereum, which is for me like late 2016, you need to imagine an ICO was happening there, maybe one ICO a week even was happening. It was most likely from a person which was well known in the community. So it's like, let's say someone in your football club wants to make their own new football club. You would just help him to open his own football club. Back in late 2016, it was most likely like this. Yes, Ethereum addresses were still needed. You had some basic kinds of things. This was one of the first Ethereum ICOs I contributed, which was called First Blood. It was very easy. I think something like this you would not see nowadays anymore. Then like 1,000 after Ethereum, mid-2017, most people most likely at that time got attracted into the whole ICO game, investing game. Media was talking about it. But it started like a little bit more. If you think for a developer in the beginning, you didn't have to do much to do an ICO. Just put on like an Ethereum address. But then started, you need to make sure that people tick the terms of service. Then they started with this pre-sale bonuses, earlier sales, crowd sales, private pre-sales, whatever things were going on. And also like these bonus contributions. It got more complicated. You see there it had multiple steps. You had to basically agree to the terms of services. Proof of ownership back then was very easy. And then you see like even like MetaMask thing popped up at that time. So it was getting more and more easier to get into these things. But from a developer's perspective, it gets more and more harder to even set up this kind of initial contract. And now, which is for me like late 2017 and to mid 2018, a lot of things happen. So you see like if you do an ICO, there's token issuing dashboards where you have to do KYC, AML. You want to get into a pre-sale, so you have to register earlier. You need to at minimum contribute a certain amount. Then they have the crowd sale, and then the bonus structure. So if you send more, you get more bonus. If you send more in an earlier time, to get even much more bonus. This had all things which comes to a very crazy thing. And I invested in one ICO from Switzerland, and they were working with Swisscom, and they have this video identification. And I was writing that on sorry, I'm not now spending half an hour to do a video identification to participate in your ICO, and there's a kind of a passus, if you know the person personally, he basically said, I know you personally, no worries, you don't need to do that shit because I want your contribution, let's say it this way. You see here, like even like a recent ICO, it was not on Ethereum, it was on Neo. They built a very nice dashboard. They built their own kind of extension on Chrome. You needed to do a video verification. So even participation in an ICO, in the beginning, it just took you like 2 seconds. Now it takes you maybe an hour, and even to research to go there. The future could get even more crazier. Sorry, I wrote Goldman Sachs, but yeah. They are like, now it's like token issuing, and like I think all these things, like I see it from each ICO project you help, it's getting more and more complicated, like token lockups. So token lockups are things like you participate in the ICO, but as long as you don't do your KYC, your specific tokens are not movable from your address. Then you have things like which is starts and stops of selling contracts. People even change the terms of the contracts because they don't raise the full funds. They start to extend the period. Things get a little bit out of hand, let's say it this way. Banks moved in as well. Now we have governments have regulations, not unified regulations, but yeah, we will see that. Maybe the future looks like a little bit like this. Maybe we have to queue up somewhere in a bank to participate in an ICO, or even there are like ATMs where we can participate in an ICO. We thought, Matthias and me, we thought about a fun project to make a kind of Austrian ATM, as ICO ATM, and place it randomly at places. Let's see if we do that. And then also, so like for me, like what are the predictions? Most likely everyone knows Binance or. Okay, not that much. So Binance is basically the largest crypto asset trading platform. And imagine maybe they get bigger than Nasdaq in terms of volume, in terms of financing instruments are listed. And then like for me, it's like, think about this, like basically all these tokens and the cryptocurrencies are replacing completely stock markets. Because if you think about it, what's happening now, if you're having this security token discussion, it's literally what traditional stocks are doing. So maybe we go in a direction like this and just talk with someone who is into, so like if you buy your stocks on your bank, there's a lot of things happening in the background which you not really realize. And yeah, what is for me is something like which is called everything is tradable. So you can imagine you could even tokenize like the ownership of your car, of your house. You could use this certificate of ownership or this token, for example, to apply for credit to confirm that you own something. And yeah, it's like now we are developers, we are Moon soon. Each presentation about cryptocurrency needs some Lambos and unicorns. I don't think that will happen that soon at the moment, but we will go there. And then, the problem is, oh shit, we've been already to the moon. People who are into Bitcoin, they think that for some of the people which are earning in, we're already beyond the moon. People which are moving now in, if they go to the moon, we go to don't know where, to Mars, so we will see that. And that, I would like to hand over to Matthias. He gives you a little bit of a conclusion. And then let's see if we have a short discussion as well, if you have time.
Yeah, thanks for holding on.
You need mine?
Hey. That didn't go as planned. But thanks for holding on. So just to give you a conclusion, and thank you also to my colleagues Daniel Pichler and Jürgen Hoebarth for explaining a little bit of a different history to that we use to hear usually. So I think a lot of things we hear in crypto are personal stories and personal almost emotional stories to the whole thing. It can be only like puzzle pieces of the whole thing. So, but what we can conclude and what we can say is that for the first time in history, we are actually able to test specific new economic models. We can test and apply them in real time, and we can actually have a significant amount of users use them. Because if we look at digital cash and all the different experiments and all the different pieces that were there already in the 90s, we had, in a way, digital cash. We had all the specific parameters. But now we have the systems and we can deploy them and we can make sure that they have specific security properties, which is actually unique in the time. We didn't have that last year. I was actually pointing in the last 100 years. Now we have it. And I was pointing to all these kind of different elements to the project cultures. Now we have different competing economic systems, different value propositions that interfere with each other possibly. So this is all interesting, but at the same time, we cannot wait for old structures and institutes to bring the new knowledge. This is a problem because, as I was also pointing out, and also my colleagues were showing, we have all these kind of things and all these kind of developments that come from outsider perspectives, that come from the fringe, that come from the so-called dark side in a way. So we can't wait for that, and we have to make sure that these developments somehow can actually continue to foster, in order to get a mainstream adoption of crypto. So if we look at the original Bitcoin white paper from Satoshi Nakamoto, Satoshi was not actually having an advertising agency or having some actually agenda. I mean, other people would disagree, but the thing is, first of all, it's not 100% clear who he is, although most people that big into crypto know that there is such a thing as distributed identities. But at the same time, we have to also accept that specific things could not be envisioned by Satoshi in the first place. He was actually only looking at proof of work. He had also this idea of one CPU, one vote, which was largely undermined by ASICs. We saw in the last month also different coins that would actually split away from a pure ASIC mining because of the mining centralization that was actually tackled and was discussed by Satoshi. This is a problem if a specific single entity owns or has control over more than 60% or 50% of the hashing power. So what we have to actually also accept is that there's a lot of different cultures at the same time interfacing with each other. So we have the holding culture, which is largely attributed to Bitcoin. We have the building culture, which is Ethereum. And then we have the spending culture, which is now Monero, or like all these kind of fungible cryptocurrencies. So we see one very important aspect of crypto. So we have the cash aspect, one element. Which kind of coin will take the cash aspect? What is like the payment token? We have the element of like what Ethereum is currently tackling, which is like a Turing-complete machine, a distributed computing platform, Skynet, so to say, which is already also challenged by a lot of other coins. And we have, of course, the store of value, the long-term store of value, which is still Bitcoin, but we have a lot of forks, as we also heard what Daniel was pointing at. So there might be different stores of values already. So I want to also point to the fact that technology is not a tool, technology is a mindset. And in the end, we are researchers and developers, so we have to actually make sure that this stays like that and that we all can have a piece of the technology cake, so to say, and everything else will follow. So thank you very much. I'm very happy that we had the time to discuss this so thoroughly. And yeah, see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Actually, there are a lot of questions that you have introduced on Slido, so I would like to take the time now to go through those. And also, thank you all for really staying here till the end of the talk. You wouldn't be here if this wasn't a topic that's very interesting or is interest for you. So the top question was, do you really think cryptocurrencies will supersede common currencies?
Should we each give an answer, or? I think in the long run, yeah, why not? Like I think the vision of having like a global currency is here now. I'm not sure if you've already invented it or if you are still like building on the concept. But like it seems to me like at the beginning of the internet where a lot of things didn't work. But as long as the vision is there, at one point it's possible to achieve this idea. And I don't think this vision of a global currency is ever going away since we had the inception of Bitcoin. So my opinion, don't know when, but yes.
Well, in the past, gold was sort of the global currency.
Yeah.
So you were saying.
I agree. So the concept of a cryptocurrency will survive. We don't know if it's Bitcoin or whatever exists now, but technically it's the way it will go.
Agree. Soon.
Soon.
Because there is a question like, with a question that I had that I brought up, can tokens really replace stock markets? That's kind of a related question then.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Explain.
No, it's just like if you think about how this, I just talked with the founder of Wikifolio, how it really works in the background, all with the stocks and how you buy stocks, it's very complicated. So, and this concept of like, it's like tokens, it's just a contract, it's a blockchain, it's interchangeable, they're very easy to transfer, everyone can participate, it's kind of a global standard. Imagine if you talk to a guy who is basically very high up in a certain stock, how to call it, like something like Stuttgart, the Börse, things like that. And for him, it was so confusing that you can technically, if you think you have Wienerberger Aktien in Austria on the stock market, and take that Wienerberger Aktien and trade it on Nasdaq. Because this concept of exchanges is in cryptocurrency totally different. So you have multiple exchanges trading the same currencies and stuff like this. So for him, this was like very crazy, but in another way, it was kind of very eye-opening that there's a very easy to transfer assets around and things like this. So that's why I'm thinking that they can definitely replace the system. Like it was before, people were trading papers, and then it went digital, and that's just an evolution.
Yes. And speaking of paper, because you mentioned about hardware wallets, So if we were to take, let's say, our assets off the chain, which hardware wallet would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few. I think the biggest two are Ledger Wallet and Trezor. They are both great options. I own both of them, multiple actually. There is also KeepKey, which also like tries to make a name for itself. I think they're all way better options than keeping your money at an exchange or like, doing any 14-step craziness with WinRAR. So yeah, I think of the bigger ones, anyone will actually do.
I think what we'll do is we'll take 2 questions here for everyone, and then what we'll do is we'll wrap it up, and then I'm sure you have time if you want to talk one-on-one with them, because I sense those who are here really would like to maybe ask you some more personal questions. But this is a good question. Why does the price of Bitcoin really influence other cryptocurrencies?
I would say the main reason is that Bitcoin is basically the US dollars of crypto in a way. So as in a way the lead currency, that means actually there's a lot of markets that would actually, where you would actually change a specific altcoin to Bitcoin. So it wouldn't be, the price wouldn't be valued, wouldn't be evaluated in Tether or in US dollars, but would be evaluated in Satoshi, which is the smallest currency for Bitcoin. So that usually drives this situation. At the same time, day traders, but also like hodlers, are realizing their wins in Bitcoin. So this is why, in the end, there's the panic and all other effects kicking in, which in the end, at least to my, as I see it, affect basically all coins. And as we see the current market developments right now, we can actually see that this is exactly what happens. So as soon as Bitcoin goes down, altcoins go down. There's a lot of logics to this, but maybe my colleagues.
Yeah, because Bitcoin is as well. If you think about the crossing, like trading pairs, Bitcoin is like most likely shitcoin trades against Bitcoin, shitcoin trades against Ethereum. So that's why they are also basically influence all the other cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, I like to add to those 2 points. I think it's a lot of sentiment. Like I wanted to bring over, like at the beginning, I think people don't see the crypto market as valid or as being validated. So it's kind of if like the biggest thing would die, or like if the biggest thing like gets into question, that all other things also look bad. And yeah, I think a lot of people like, or we don't know how to value tokens. We don't know how to value blockchains in general. So you can't really value them in dollars, even though every like newspaper wants to do that. We see that in Ethereum. In the paper I wrote, we actually just correlated like the Ethereum price and like token prices, or like ICOs, and we saw that it's basically exactly the same. So people invest 10% of their Ether into a project they like, regardless of the like US dollar price. So kind of this market tries to find its own price besides US dollars. And that's why it's like shifting as a whole. It's like this whole boat they're all on. And if the captain gets sick, like everybody like panics.
Last question then. When will we reach the moon?
Soon.
Yeah, I mean, this is a general question soon, but there are counter questions. For whom? Means, you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, when will the dollar die?
And which moon is the most important question?
Who asked that question?
Because Earth has a moon, so Mars has a moon, so whatever.
Which universe are you in?
Yes, exactly. No, technically, it depends how you define moon.
Like I like this halving idea, like that after every halving you see like a price spike, so maybe 2020.
Matthias, Jürgen, Daniel from Riot, thank you very much.
Good.